welcome to the 58th New York Film Festival presented by Film at Lincoln Center. My name is Maddie Whittle. I am a member of the year-round programming team at Film at Lincoln Center and co-programmer of the New York Film Festival Talks section this year, which has been expanded to be a full section of the festival in this year's edition. And as you are now experiencing, is taking place entirely virtually as a result of everything that has led to our theater closures in the last few months. But I'm really, really excited to be here with you all and joined by such an exciting group of panelists for this event, which we've titled Outside the Canon. And we will get into what that means a little later. But first, I just have a few words to say before we get things going. The New York Film Festival has always been about bringing the community together to celebrate cinema, whatever we take that community to mean. And whether you're joining us now in our virtual cinema or at another point in the festival during one of our drive-in venues, on behalf of everyone at Film and Lincoln Center, thank you for being part of this historic edition and part of this community of film lovers who are joining us for the festival this year, many of you from around the world. Thank you to the Film at Lincoln Center board, patrons, members, and the moviegoers who make our work possible throughout the year. We are a nonprofit, and as such, we rely on your support. You can become a member, which is a great way to join the community, and also take advantage of discounts and special offers while helping us to continue sharing the best in cinema with New Yorkers and, especially this year, the world. If you're not a member, you can find out how to become one today on our website, which is www.filmlink.org. I also want to recognize the tireless efforts of all of our staff and volunteers who are working behind the scenes to make this festival a reality. It's been a challenging year, but also an exciting one, and we're really glad to get to share what we've put into the festival with our audience around the country and the world. You can continue to access NYFF from anywhere with this free virtual talk series that you're attending right now. These talks are taking place throughout the festival, and you can subscribe to the Film at Lincoln Center podcast, where you'll find Q&As with filmmakers, panel discussions, and other audio materials. Please also be sure to subscribe to our newsletter if you don't want to miss any of our exciting festival updates or announcements, which include free talks and podcasts, which continue to be added throughout the festival. And you can join the conversation by following us on social media and sharing your festival experience with #NYFF. It's this year more than ever, that's where we're really finding the community in the festival experience. And last but not least, a special thank you to our many festival partners, especially in this case, HBO, who is the presenting partner of Film at Lincoln Center Talks. And then that's about all I have, but thank you all again for joining us in the audience and on this panel, and welcome to the festival. And now we get to the fun stuff, which is the topic of today's conversation. But before we really get into that, I would like to have my panelists go around and introduce themselves. If you just want to say your name and where you are in the world, where you are in quarantine, since we're all far-flung today. And if you could just say a few words about the work that you do in alternative or grassroots film culture, whatever you take that to mean. A lot of you are multi-hyphenate organizers and founders and editors and programmers. And if you just want to say a bit about the work that you do, that would, I think, be a great place to kick us off. So Vanessa, why don't you start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Vanessa McDonnell. I am quarantined here in Brooklyn, New York. I am part of Spectacle Theater, which is a 30-seat microcinema in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It's entirely run by a collective of volunteers. And I do programming and other day-to-day things with the theater. And I'm also a co-creator of the Eyeslicer, which is a independent variety show, which exists on the internet and as a physical object, and features short form work by filmmakers around the country.
Thanks. Let's see. Abby, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Maddie, for that intro and for having us all here. I am currently in the greater Boston area. I'm in Somerville specifically. And before quarantine, I programmed a bi-weekly screening series of documentary films called the DocYard, which itself started outside of institutions. It was co-founded by 3 people who are very active in the documentary scene in New England and in Boston who wanted to create a space for filmmakers to gather. Now it is a program of an institution, the Left Foundation. And so once quarantine started, we moved online, and I have lots of thoughts about how that's going for not just the DocYard, but for all other virtual festivals today. During quarantine, I organized a series called My Sight is Lined with Visions. This was co-curated with Keisha Knight, who, along with Sarah Kim, who I see in the audience, is one of the co-founders of Sentient Art Film. And this was a repertory screening series of 1990s Asian American film and video on the more transgressive and experimental side that we did for the internet, for virtual screening. And we started that after the pandemic started.
Thank you. Rooney, would you like to go next?
Hi, everybody. I'm Rooney Elmi. I'm based here in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio. And again, thank you, Maddie, for the introduction, and also Vanessa and Abby. Like everyone you're shouting out, I'm such huge fans of as well. So for me, I'm the founder and managing editor of SVLLY, which is an irregular print and digital movie magazine geared toward curating a radical cinephilia. We released 3 issues and hoping to make some more, but we ran into this other issue called funding. So if there's any cool people in the chat who appreciate the vision and want to fund us, just hit me up. And I also co-run No Evil Eye with my amazing collaborator, Ingrid Raphael. And No Evil Eye is basically this nomadic microcinema that our biggest aim is to redefine the social and creative parameters of local film scenes, specifically our home base of Columbus, Ohio. And we do that by curating an eclectic mix of films from emerging and established filmmakers from around the world that vary in style and substance. And we try to spearhead a physical space that fosters the union between the personal and the political. So essentially, No Evil Eye is half original film programming and half accessible educational workshops around the moving image. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Thomas?
Hi, I'm Thomas Beard. I am a co-founder and co-director of Light Industry, which is a venue for film and electronic art in Greenpoint. I'm actually in the Light Industry office right now. And since 2008, we've hosted a regular program of events, screenings, lectures, conversations, that kind of thing, often in collaboration with invited artists or filmmakers, writers, curators. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Ajay.
Hey, my name is Ajay. I'm from the Bronx, and I'm currently in Madison, Wisconsin, due to the pandemic, and you know, living in the Midwest for the first time ever. It's interesting. And yeah, I'm the co-founder of Upside Film Festival. We started in 2017. We're New York based, specifically in Harlem and the Uptown areas. And we created this kind of out of this purpose of, we've all worked in art house cinemas, and me and my co-founders, and we all saw kind of the disparity and this gap between who gets to screen their films, who goes to films, and who like is kept out of the loop, maybe on purpose, maybe due to like a blind eye. And we really wanted to bridge that gap. I mean, I'm a filmmaker. I really came up not really in an academic setting, just got a camera put in my hand, and my mom would like give me books on film every Christmas. And that's kind of how I learned. And I understand that it's an unfair, there's an unfair like like the game is rigged. And we really wanted to kind of knock the chessboard over and give these kids in these communities who like love film or may not even know that they love film yet a chance to really become up close and personal with filmmakers they can learn something from. So we've done community screenings in community gardens and in church basements. And we've also done stuff at Film and Lincoln Center, and we've done stuff in people's brownstones. And it's been really rewarding to see what happens when you begin to close the gap and accept radical accessibility as a need and a necessity and a beauty as well. So yeah, I'm super hyped to be here.
Oh, thank you all so much, and I'm really excited to really dig in. Sort of laid the groundwork beautifully for us. I'll just before we get into it, I will say it looks like chat has already begun in the text chat box, but there will be time at the end of the talk for getting to some audience questions. Some of them we might bring into the conversation earlier. But you can submit them either via the chat function or via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Either one is fine. And we definitely want this to be an open conversation with everyone in the audience. So we will make a point of making time for that. So just to get us going, I kind of want to start by talking about the thinking behind this panel, which really, I think the seeds were planted when a New York Times essay came out earlier this summer that sparked a lot of discussion on social media and in art house exhibition circles. This was an essay by Kyle Buchanan and Reggie Ugwu about the lack of diverse filmmaker representation in the Criterion collection specifically, and how so-called blind spots in institutional leadership and curatorial expertise perpetuate this problem and allow it to sort of trickle out into broader questions of canon. What does it mean to have a film canon, and why are our existing film canons so non-diverse and often limited in the curatorial point of view that goes into them? What's the role of gatekeeping institutions, specifically within distribution, exhibition, and film criticism, and just film culture more broadly, in perpetuating this sort of exclusivity of even the very idea of a canon? And so what we wanted to bring you all together to shed some light on and share your expertise about was how these groups and organizations and initiatives that you've been a part of have sort of, you've all, rather than approach the problem of a film canon as something that needs to be fixed or that needs to be sort of reworked in order to make it more diverse, you've taken the problem more from the ground up and taken an interest in what we've termed collective or grassroots film culture, really building new audiences, new communities to sort of get away from the need to have any singular canon at all for all of the flaws that the idea of a canon entails. So with that being said, I hope that we can sort of kick off by starting this conversation about how you all see your, what you see as your constituencies, your communities, the sort of audiences that you are working for and working to cultivate in your work. And I don't know who wants to start us off. Vanessa, why don't you start us?
Sure. Well, in terms of spectacle, the theater has been really centered around its physical space and people who can come in real life and watch movies there throughout its history. So, the community has been, and the audience has been just people from around the city who make the journey there to see films. And of course, now that's changed because theaters close, then we're doing, single stream screenings on Twitch instead, which has, obviously opened up the audience to, anyone who can log in. But I think our mission and our goals in terms of, programmatically what we want to do, that hasn't really changed yet or evolved necessarily, because it's still very much an experiment in terms of existing only online. But I think that, Spectacle has a certain structure that is kind of interesting in terms of talking about institutions versus smaller grassroots organizations, and that it's there's a flexibility because we have only volunteers. We don't have like a long-term staff of programmers. So we have volunteers who come in and out. People, program for a while and they have lots of ideas, and then they go do something else for a while and they come back. So there's a certain mobility and freedom in that. There's, it also means that there are always new people involved and new ideas, but there's also a nice mix of institutional memory there as well, in terms of, in terms of having a programmatic sort of mission. And that's served us really well. I think that there's no larger institutional presence sort of policing that. There's just kind of an internal collective process. And I think that that's been sort of I think the source of our success. And, we just celebrated 10 years, continuously operating in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in New York. And, we've sort of always had like a little bit of a marginal month-to-month existence, but somehow that's actually become our strength and the reason why we've been able to retain a certain kind of strong voice in terms of our programming. Yeah.
That's I'm interested in putting that sort of the model that you're describing in conversation with a model like No Evil Eye Cinema or like Upside Film Festival, which use some of the same sort of conceptual building blocks that you've mentioned in terms of sort of flexibility, adaptability, responsiveness, but in different kind of programming contexts. Ajay, why don't you speak a little bit more about how Upside works and how you program for a film festival that is specifically unrooted in a specific geographic venue?
I mean, our mentality has always been, hold up one second, I'm gonna close my window because someone's mowing the lawn outside. Hold up. So I think that for us, when it comes to just like a geographic standpoint, we've realized, and we've always known, that any space can be a cineplex. You can hang a tarp, or you can like pull out a VHS player and a big TV with the back on it, and you can give people this window into a new world. I mean, I think a lot of us, I think I speak for like at least a lot of Black filmmakers I know, a lot of us, our first taste of like film and our first taste of like what the wonder of that medium, they weren't Black films. They were like, for me, it was like Close Encounters and Jurassic Park and North by Northwest. And like, there are all these films that I watched like with my cousins and that I watched with my mom, and like these Hitchcock films and these Spielberg films. And that wonder was given to me. And we didn't see any of that in Cineplex. These movies came out 15 years before I was born. but it gave me the same kind of spark. And it led me here. Like, it doesn't matter if the first film you saw was a Godard film and you saw it like in the theater in the East Village, you still got that same spark of wonder that I got watching Close Encounters at my cousin's crib on this like Toshiba television that also has a VHS attached to it. And I think it's taking, I think that there's this thing where it's like, there's this shift that's happened where cinema used to be seen as low culture, low art. And I think that over the years, cinema has become this thing where it's like high art. You have to see it on an IMAX screen. You have to go to the Sunshine. You have to pay $17 and you have to read the Village Voice, RIP to the Village Voice, to like even find out which films you're supposed to see. And that's part of where I think breaking down the canon means also breaking down the idea of what a cineplex has to be. Like, we screened Night of the Living Dead in my childhood church, and I feel like people needed to see that because of just like the racial importance of it. And we screened a 20-minute James Baldwin interview in this community garden on 122nd and Amsterdam, because like the kids in that neighborhood like saw what was happening and they saw the music and they came in. And you don't get that when there's an usher here and then there's the film that will change a kid's life here. And we're just trying to break all of those barriers, and it's possible. Like, it's possible to like go to a community space, set up a projector, and open a kid's like whole life up to something new. So yeah, I think like to answer your question, Maddie, it's like, it's really about deconstructing what a cineplex is, and that a screen is a screen and people are going to like be transported no matter where it is.
I think that also speaks really nicely to the sort of importance of the collective viewing experience, which sort of mirrors the collective programming ethos that Vanessa was describing. Rooney, you mentioned that your work is guided by sort of a vision of a radical cinephilia that you'd like to cultivate and foster. And that seems to spread across both your editorial work with Sullywood and your exhibition programming work with No Evil Eye. Can you talk about bridging those two sort of forms of cultural expression?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I loved what you were saying about the variety of possibilities with exhibition, because I think that bleeds so heavily into what No Evil Eye's mission is. We've only just celebrated our 1-year anniversary, so we're like still a fetus, but we have so many different ideas of where we want to go with it. And with that title of microcinema, we're so free to do whatever the hell we want, especially being a nomadic microcinema. And what that means is, since we prioritize being a physical space and now sort of translating that online. So yeah, just in terms of both Sullywood and No Evil Eye sprung up, I mean, their genesis was this amalgamation of frustration and discomfort and anger, and also just true like belief in what the future can hold in terms of what the moving image can be for people. It's been like historically, it hasn't been put in the right hands, or people just haven't. I think, at least for me, I always have a difficult time talking about film or talking about what I do, because I'm not inspired by film or filmmakers or filmmaking at all, but I'm inspired by what the camera can do and what people, like people power, can do with this technology. So with No Evil Eye specifically, we really wanted it to be this unique space that prioritizes the identities of creatives that have historically been ostracized from the big screen, and in essence just be this playground for dialogue around the democratization of media and the self-representation of excluded groups. And I think that is also the editorial mission for Sullywood as well. Both No Evil Eye and Sullywood have their own separate like mission statements and manifestos, so maybe I could share that in the chat. But with No Evil Eye, like we always have to reiterate, like we want to promote this realistic yet utopian vision of cinema as a space for socio-political possibilities. And we want to accomplish that through our original programming, through our accessible workshops. Almost everything we've ever done has been for free. And through being this like public theater, we really want to be a people's theater. We don't have a specific physical space. We kind of just like morph into wherever we're at, whatever new city or new town or new space we're in. We always make sure to acknowledge where we're at and give thanks, as well as connect with local artists and creatives and political organizers there as well. Because Ingrid and I, we both met as like these young political organizers here in Columbus, Ohio. So it's important for us to bridge that gap between the personal and the political. And again, with No Evil Eye, like we're not interested in being this collective or being like a scene or even being like a network or a clique. If anything, we want to be the exact opposite of that. We're like adamantly against that whole notion. We're against the status quo. We want to make something new and alternative. And that's all been key in the formation of our microcinema. And we want to ignite the radical imagination around the moving image and like be this public theater and take up physical space wherever we are, domestically or internationally, hopefully, once this is all figured out. And also like collab with like-minded individuals, which I hope is everybody that's logged onto the Zoom.
That's great. And I hope that anyone watching will chime in with thoughts or questions, and we will definitely weave that into this conversation. I am curious to hear from Thomas, his experience with light industry, because that sort of it stands out among this group of initiatives as sort of the closest to an institution, I think, of what's being represented here, while still being a departure from the institutions of its community. It's
it's funny to think of light industry as an institution. I mean, for me, it's still just like a grid of folding chairs, you know, and a surface to protect on, like Ajay was saying. So that's just kind of, you know, we're getting by month to month, but somehow by some miracle we're still around. But when we began in 2008, I think that part of the impetus for starting the light industry was one, that a lot of the kind of alternative cinemas that had been very active in New York in the 90s and the early O's had begun to wind down at that time. And so it felt like there was a need for a new kind of venue at that particular moment in New York. And more than that, though, I feel like I noticed how there was so much activity in the city and so many different communities around different kinds of work, but they were also a bit balkanized, you know, like whether it was, say, like an audience for contemporary visual art, or an audience for documentary, let's say, or an audience for repertory cinema. That all these things were and remain very active in New York, but it was amazing how you kind of would see someone at one kind of event, but not another. And so with light industry, part of our hope was that by having a calendar that brought together a lot of these different audiences, that there might be a way that they would cross over, I guess you could say. So, and I think, and then part of that also has to do with the guests that we invite to work with on the shows. So let's say you have a writer like Hilton Alls, who showed this amazing teleplay of an Alice Childress play called Wedding Band that was produced by the Public Theater many years ago, and very hard to see, but a piece that was of special interest to him. And so, for instance, here you would have maybe people who are interested in theater, but not necessarily going to repertory film screenings. That this was, would be one path in lightness. That there would be a kind of path to light industry for them. Or if you had, say, an artist like Martine Sims did an amazing show called Quality Television that was all about visual artists who worked with the formal language of television in their work, both kind of, her peers, contemporary artists, but also older work, kind of early 70s video, for instance. And so there you might have, an audience, a kind of more contemporary art audience coming through. And I think that, and my one thing that I'm proud of with light industry is I think that's really been the case, right? That you would see people at, like I would see some kind of like art world person at a Tony Booba, screening about, Pennsylvania factory workers or something. And so I think that, that remains a kind of an animating impulse behind light industry. So that there's not necessarily like a community for light industry, but rather every show is, in a sense, a kind of possibility to expand the potential community for light industry. So the lineup is eclectic, but it's not just kind of eclectic for eclecticism's sake, but rather a way to kind of rope rope everyone into the cinema.
Kind of a programming as outreach, kind of. That sort of leads to a question that somebody alluded to in their opening remarks, but I'm very interested in how all of your work has been transformed by this current moment of sort of going virtual or going outside, as the case may be. And if Abby, I was wondering if you'd like to speak to your experience programming an entirely online film series that is kind of drew on a radical concept for its.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that, but I guess maybe I'm gonna sidestep that a little bit and try to connect some threads because, well, first of all, the idea for that series really came in the early days of the pandemic when I was watching all of these art house cinemas around the country scrambling for programming and basically just taking whatever distributors were handing to them. So this is when Kino Lorber, a company that I love, honestly, like got Kino Marquee online really quickly and started, pushing everything. For a couple of weeks, the only films that art house cinemas around the country were programming for Kino Lorber titles, which is an interesting monopoly for about 2 weeks. But I was really inspired by Spectacle moving the screenings online to Twitch and seeing hundreds of people join in for those early screenings and seeing the energy that was gathered around. And with Keisha, we just wondered why more cinemas honestly were not moving in that direction. And I have lots of thoughts about why I think it's really hard. It has to amount with a lot of art house cinemas around the country now don't even book their own films. They use book cinema bookers whose only job, for instance, balcony booking is really big for this. If you're wondering why even in supposedly independent cinema spaces in the US, why the programming is all the same, it's because it's the same company that is booking all of these first run titles, for instance. Like structurally, there's a lot that's happening that is very strange right now. And I think one thing that's really nice, because I used to work for institutions and film festivals, one thing that's really nice about not working is that we can be really nimble and moving really quickly. And for me, that's kind of the main issue, even with this Criterion Channel article in the New York Times, is that we put all of our intention and energy into one thing, like the Criterion Channel, without realizing that it's actually this monopoly of attention that is as much the problem as what this one company is actually programming or selecting to me. Because whenever there's like one festival, like Sundance for independent films in the US, the power just inordinately falls into their hands. It leads to like this colonizing situation where Sundance is now not only going to be in Park City, Utah, but is going to be in 20 cities around the US simultaneously this January, and this is supposed to be a good thing. I have lots of thoughts about that. So for me, like, the moving online has actually, even though it's created kind of the fractures of these spaces for something like My Site is Lined with Visions to fall into and to garner, we never would have been able to get the press attention, the interviews that we got for that series, if it had been during a regular cycle, I think. Because we had the contacts and the editors that I knew through writing film criticism were looking for content, we truly believe that we got so much placed in magazines and film magazines that we couldn't have otherwise. We were also, because we didn't need to book a venue or to pay for DCP shipping costs, we're able to pay for things like we commissioned essays, including, there are a few people in the chat that we commissioned essays from. I saw Jurish Shambu earlier and Davika, of course. And so we were able to spend, you know, what budget we had on that. But honestly, the biggest amount of money that we spent on that series was paying fees to Vimeo. And to me, this is kind of the main problem with moving everything online virtually right now that no one is talking about. And it's like my own fears of a techno-authoritarian future in which all of our platforms, everything that we're doing, is being controlled by these huge multinational corporations. In the grand scheme of things, your local art house cinema is a much smaller beast than Amazon or even Vimeo. I was looking up the profits for Vimeo in the second quarter, and yeah, they're making a lot of money off of this. I'm curious how other people are thinking about this, whether or not our own bids at, you know, doing grassroots cinema culture online is actually perpetuating something that's much bigger and much worse. It's a little bit doom and gloom here, but that's what I've been thinking about recently.
That brings up a really interesting set of questions that I would love to hear more from Vanessa about, and specifically in relation to the spectacle moving onto Twitch and streaming film.
Yeah, basically we've already had some trouble with Twitch where our account was suspended because there was nudity in a film that we showed. So it was, you know, an art film that contained a naked human body, and so we were just shut off, which is ridiculous, obviously. And I think what we are moving towards is trying to build our own kind of player platform that can, you know, exist through our website, and there's a group of volunteers who are working on that and testing that out to see how feasible that is. But obviously it's a common problem that all of us encounter when we're using these, you know, trying to choose the least worst option among all of these interfaces in terms of how offensive they are as companies, how much they charge, and versus going your own way and building something and possibly losing out on, you know, maybe possibly losing out on whatever kind of like built-in audience might come with a certain platform. I mean, these are kind of maddening problems. But yeah, I think we're moving towards building our own player, basically, so that we don't have to be on Twitch. But I mean, you know, it's worked to get us going online. I think, you know, some of us, I think obviously like all of us are reluctant to have closed our theaters and have to do that. Although, you know, it's an interesting experiment as well, though, in terms of like opening our theaters up to the world. But yeah, it's a problem.
You all have sort of can speak to different models of infrastructure and sort of sustainability, and how you create structures within a collective or within an organization or just within a partnership between, you know, two programmers to adapt to changing scenarios in terms of your physical resources and your venue availability. And I'm interested in your sort of organizational approaches, how you preserve ideas of equity and sustainability, and how you organize things like decision making and leadership within these groups that you're each representative of. Ajay, why don't we talk about Upside Film Festival and how that's organized and the leadership structure of it?
It's funny because like equity and like grassroots, so like there should be more of a Venn diagram between it, but it's like no one's getting paid. Well, all three of us who run Upside Film Festival, we're all like friends first. And I think that's not always, I understand how that's not always important to some organizations, but for us, it's been the crux of just like getting through, like breaking barriers, is that it's important that we have like check-ins with each other. And it's not just like, how can we get to this place the quickest and the more efficient, but it's like, do we need to take some time off? Because nothing is more important than the mental health of my friends, the people who I work with, the people, like, it's like, I feel like, especially for when it comes to building community, like we all are, we have to make sure that we're checking in with ourselves first, because we have to like water this garden. And yeah, I mean, as far as leadership goes, we're all just, as for right now, me and my two best friends at Upside, and we're all just like, it's very much just like this telepathy thing of like, what needs to get done and how do we do this without falling through the floor? Because we can't serve our constituents, our people, like the people in our communities, if we're like just spread out. Because I feel like it's important, the smaller your team is, the more important it is to just really have face-to-face check-ins, because what we're doing is hard, because like Abby said, like there is a monopoly. Like this isn't, like it's not a game. Like I said on the phone to like both of my team members a few days ago, I was like, I'm just now realizing like that this whole festival thing, like also just like the film industry in general, it's pay to play. I come from music, and it's like the biggest scam in like New York is pay to play. Like you gotta pay to get on stage, and like you should never like pay to provide your service of art, because art is a service to humanity. And I think like people go to film school just so they can get their hands on equipment. It's not even just like, it's like my mom would always be like, just make a film. And I'm like, it's not like coming from music where it's like I could have a microphone and a laptop and I could possibly get an album done in my room. This equipment is $10,000 to rent. And if you don't have skin in the game, then you can't have skin in the game. If you haven't spent time on a set, you won't know what a set looks like. This is one of those things where closing the gap is so important, because the more that the gap, like it's really scary that Sundance is like colonialization is like the perfect term for it. Like Sundance is going into these other cities and being like, fuck what you were doing. This is Sundance Film Festival now, and we're not just in Utah. If you want to get your indie film played in Columbus, Ohio, you have to go to Sundance Film Festival, because we are like buying out all of the theaters that you would like normally talk face to face with. So I think I went on a bit of a tangent, but it's hard. Like this is like hard work, because a lot of us are doing this with no money. If you're not coming from the academic sphere, you might not have a mentor. I don't have a mentor. Like there's not many people in my family I could talk to about filmmaking. So it's like, it's really about checking in on the people you're working with and be like, are you okay? We're breaking barriers and we might be breaking our bones in the process. So for me, like leadership means taking the lead on being like, hey, let's check in real quick. This is hard work. What do we need to do to get this done? And I'm here for you. That's the important thing for me.
Thomas, could you talk about the sort of leadership structure of light industry? I know you and Ed Halter
well, there you just said that that's the whole. It's just two people. So the leadership structure is just myself and my best friend, and it's been like that since the beginning. But I think that in terms of equity, I think that one of the things that was important to us from the get-go was that, for instance, paying artists for their work should always be a significant part of how we do things. And we began with no resources. Like a friend let us use an unrented studio space in Sunset Park, and Ed put a video projector on his credit card. We got some folding chairs from some party rental place on Long Island that was trying to unload them. But even so, people maybe were paying $5 at the door, but so the pie we had was small then. It's not so huge now, but in any case, even from the beginning, when the resources we had were so limited, there was still a way to compensate the people that we were working with, because it was a testament that to kind of how we wanted to operate, and I think that it's not a given, right? Like, I mean, I definitely have been in a position where light industry, can pay a filmmaker $200 to show some short work of theirs, and then I'm doing some side gig at a huge institution with a budget of literally 1,000 times light industry's annual budget. And they're sort of like, can we pay them an honorarium? I don't know. And so I think those kinds of experiences have been very revealing to me. But yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of the structure of the organization, keeping it small means, giving the organization a great agility, but it also means that we can, really put money where it's needed, which, in many cases is just back in the hands of filmmakers and small distributors.
Because we're nearing the end of the hour, I'm looking at the questions and comments that are coming in via the chat functions. And Thomas, what you said is not so remote from a question that we got from Sophie Ramvari, who's asking about the panelists' opinions around festival submission fees and filmmaker artist fees, which you touched on, Thomas. But just the question of sort of sustaining a model where artists are being supported and compensated for their work. And I'm curious also if any of you have additional insights on that.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about this. So thank you, Sophie. And for those who don't know her, I would like to point out that Sophie is a wonderful shorts filmmaker, but she also is based in Canada, which has a lot more robust state funding for the arts. And so I think it's great that Canadian festivals are beholden a lot more to paying artist fees on a standard scale. And that scale is one that I've used myself when I've worked at an institution that I think should be paying screening fees to base what we should be paying off of. But I think, so there's a few things. I mean, I totally agree with Thomas that in a smaller institution, if we can find a way to pay screening fees and artist honorariums, there's absolutely no excuse for larger places not to be doing the same. The logic, I guess for me, like the logic behind why they don't is because they're paying for a lot of things that are quote unquote frivolous, but that they find very essential because they have specific stakeholders that they believe they need to appease. So whether or not this is the corporate sponsor or the rich individual donor, or it's even, for instance, like in European countries, like they also have to meet benchmarks from the state funder, where you do have to increase your audience year after year. You have to increase the popularity of the films. Otherwise, that's how they're being measured against. So then when you have these types of pressures, like you feel the need to fulfill them by making these corporate stakeholders or state funders happy by giving them, prioritizing their needs. And that's how things like galas and parties get funded to the tune of like hundreds of thousands of dollars for a party, versus like shorts filmmakers not getting paid and being asked to pay $60 to the film festival for the privilege of being watched. And the reason that happens is because festival economics, even when you don't have like the huge galas, they just kind of don't make sense, because on the regional level, every festival is like doing the same. I like to think a lot about like book publishing, how like if you're at a book fair, like every publisher is not like, I don't know. I mean, they might be reading the same manuscript and all, but they're not like showcasing the same books. There's like this duplication of labor that happens in the film industry that is, I think, quite unique, where every film festival is required, like you expect the programmers to be watching the same films if they're programming something new. And to me, this is just a real problem, because this happens because what the service the festival is providing is based off of scarcity. And it's based off of, we're going to allow you to watch this film first. And then when you move into a virtual space where New York Film Festival is geo-blocked to the entire US, these regional festivals have lost this thing, this one product that they can actually sell to their audience. And if they don't have a programming ethos, there are, by the way, plenty of programmers in this chat who program wonderful regional festivals. I just want to shout out Miriam Bale and Kayla Myers at Indie Memphis, just because Miriam was chatting to me earlier. That I don't think are doing this is not all festivals, of course, but like that's kind of the logic behind it. And I think that filmmakers actually have a lot of power in this situation, is what I would say. Like, filmmakers have the power to collectively not submit to a film festival and to collectively demand screening fees after their films get into film festivals. And I think, having worked inside film festivals in the past, like without demands from the filmmakers, like these things are really hard to change.
Thank you for that. And I think that really is such a central point that is an important takeaway from any conversation about expanding access and undoing the effects of existing canons, and which is another sort of way of approaching that question, which I think might be the note to end on, is a comment from Harshal Alukar, who is asking for the panelists' thoughts on models like the Flaherty Seminar and Anthology Film Archive, and these sort of programmatically specific sort of niche formats that are, examples of alternative exhibition with very particular curatorial sensibilities. And I'm interested in both, how you might respond to that prompt, but also just how you go about your own curatorial work as individuals and as parts of collectives. Ajay?
Well, I would first ask, who are the programmers? What's the diversity of programmers looking like? Are there Black programmers? Are there brown programmers? Are there East Asian programmers? Because if you don't have that type of representation and that type of input in the programming department, then what are we doing here? It really comes down to that, because at the end of the day, what Upside tries to curate is showing Black, not just like Black films that so-and-so Titch person who's in the programming department at so-and-so theater would know, which is like 5 of them, but like the stuff that was on our auntie's like VHS. I keep bringing up the VHS age, but like their VHS shelf, because that means the same thing to us. Like when me and my team members are talking, we're talking about doing like retrospects of Black coming of age films. We're not just talking about showing Moonlight 5 times in a row, and I love Moonlight. We're not just talking about showing 2 Burnett films. We're talking about there is a pantheon of Black films. There are so many Black films to go through, and the amount of effort that these institutions are showing, in my opinion, is below the bare minimum. And so it's like, when I look at these institutions that are, yes, on the fringe, but still like have brick and mortar, I'm also looking at who's in the programming staff, who's being paid, who's in the, to quote Hamilton, are they in the room where it happens? Because if you're not in the room where it happens, then the consumer and the audience is gonna suffer for that. There are too many Black people, there are too many brown people, there are too many East Asian people who know their shit, who have watched films their entire lives. You can go on Twitter and you can see them. And they should be in the room where it happens, because there is more to film than what's being shown at Anthology. And just because something is fringe, it doesn't mean that supporting the people. All people need to see themselves on the screen. And that starts with the programming department, that starts with who's being hired. So I'm not really impressed by some of these fringe institutions, because it's like, you're still showing the same shit. You're just presenting it in like an artsier program. And we need to get to a place where there's representation in the programming department. That's the least we could do.
I think that's a great note to end on. And I can see that my virtual background is failing because of the fading sunlight that I've been relying upon. So that's probably a good indication that we should wrap up. But if any of you have any last words that you'd like to shout out, now's the moment. All right. Well, I see
I would like to end off on something. I don't know. I haven't talked in like 20 minutes. Everyone's spitting. I'm just like, okay, keep going. I'm just like listening. Okay, notepad, everything. I wanted to say, especially being here out in the Midwest, I've been here. I've never been based in New York or LA. There's so many different possibilities of what can happen, especially under COVID, and we have to be open to that. And in regards to what we all do, we're all cinematic practitioners. There's people here who are filmmakers, who are critics, who are programmers, who are, maybe you run sound, maybe you're behind the camera, whatever the case may be. We have to remember that when we juxtapose film against all these other art forms, like theater, like poetry, like painting, we are an embryo, we're a fetus. And unfortunately, the reality is that as soon as the technology came, it became commercialized almost immediately. And it's sort of our duty to critique that and to continue this dialogue in all of our respective communities. So there's so many great questions that are being asked right now. And unfortunately, like, time is running out, but we can always be talking, right? We can always be sharing this dialogue. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to hear everyone out. So yeah, thank you, Maddie.
Well, thank you all so much. And I do hope that we can continue this conversation, whether in this format, in another context, or just, because we're all plugged into various conversations, and we can keep it going that way. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we can wrap it up there.
Thank you.
Thank you all.